Many professionals reach a point where the only perceived cure for burnout is total physical isolation. For an environmental consultant accustomed to the repetitive walls of an office, the rolling hills of northern Tennessee offered a specific promise: absolute quiet. The escape was a dark wood, single-story cabin tucked 4 miles from the nearest town. It was private, silent, and exactly what 3 weeks of back-to-back travel seemed to require. This map illustrates the logistical trade-off of remote isolation. As the radius of empty space around the cabin expands to guarantee peace, it simultaneously pushes the nearest emergency response further out of reach. Friday evening offered nothing but tranquility. The narrator unpacked, watched the light die between the trees from the porch, and enjoyed a silence that felt entirely safe. In these settings, the absence of urban noise often acts as a false confirmation of security. Removing oneself from society does not eliminate potential threats, it simply creates a vacuum. Without neighbors or streetlights, a threat can operate in the woods for days without ever being observed by the outside world. The shift occurred Saturday morning during a walk behind the cabin. The woods went too quiet, and the narrator felt a sharp physical sensation on the back of their neck, the distinct feeling of being watched. This is the onset of cognitive dissonance in a survival context. While the primal instinct detects an environmental anomaly, the modern brain immediately tries to categorize the fear as an overactive imagination, suppressing the alarm to maintain a sense of calm. Back inside, the anomalies continued: a floorboard creaking in the back room, the sound of a kitchen cabinet closing softly while the narrator sat in the living room. Each time they checked, the rooms were empty. By mid-afternoon, the narrator drove into town to meet a colleague, seeking out the safety of a populated main street. The dread of the cabin had become a physical weight, even if they couldn't yet point to a reason why. When the work was finished, they found reasons to stay in the safety of a bar. They suggested extra drinks and coffee, sitting in their car for 20 minutes after their colleague left, dreading the 4-mile drive back into the darkness. The human subconscious frequently identifies danger long before the conscious mind is willing to accept it. This leads to physical avoidance behaviors that we desperately try to rationalize as simple hesitation or fatigue. The road back was a corridor of complete darkness flanked by encroaching autumn trees. When the narrator pulled up at 10:20 p.m., the porch light was on. They were almost certain they had turned it off before leaving. Inside, they performed a perimeter check, locking doors and testing windows. This ritual is a common psychological response to a perceived loss of spatial control, an attempt to reestablish a boundary between the self and the unknown. At 1:47 a.m., the period of denial ended. From the kitchen came the unmistakable sound of a heavy wooden chair scraping slowly across the floor. Footsteps moved from the kitchen toward the bedroom. The narrator stood against the wall as the door handle moved all the way down, testing the lock. Then a voice spoke through the door. "I know you're awake," the man said. He claimed he had been watching for 2 days. He knew the narrator's schedule, their sleep habits, and exactly where they were standing in that moment. The ultimate terror occurs when the physical barriers we rely on become irrelevant. Locks and walls mean very little when the threat has already crossed the threshold and is standing on the other side of the bedroom door. Police arrived 11 minutes after the 911 call. They found a man in his mid-40s sitting in a living room chair, perfectly calm, as if he had every right to be there. The intruder had a history of occupying vacation rentals in the area. Officers followed his trail 300 yards into the tree line, where they discovered a hidden camp consisting of a sleeping bag, a fire pit, and a backpack. Inside the backpack was a weathered notebook. It contained meticulous timestamps recording when the cabin lights went on, when the car left, and the movements of whoever was inside. The entries began 4 days before the narrator ever checked in. This log proves that the auditory anomalies from Saturday morning were not the sounds of an old house. The intruder was physically inside the cabin, moving through the rooms while the narrator sits in the living room trying to work. For the entire 11 minutes it took for police to arrive, the narrator stayed pressed into a corner, listening to the man breathing on the other side of the door. He had spent days learning their routine, watching them through the windows and waiting for the moment they were most vulnerable. Statistically, vacation rentals are safe. However, the physical reaction to a silent forest or a sudden creak serves as an evolutionary alarm. Once a threat becomes undeniable, it has often already been operating within the perimeter for a long time.